Hello. Welcome to part three of my origins and evolution as a collector and as a hobbyist. We already made it through pipes and through coffee, and this third installment is about my interests as a consumer of literature. And I've been a reader most of my life. There was a short period of time toward the end of high school and early college where I was having some problems with my vision that really kept me from reading a lot, but we've resolved those. So I started early. My cousin turned me on to Tolkien, probably when I was 12 or 13, and I read the Tolkien novels. And that was really my first big introduction to a whole new world, right? Before that, I read quite a bit, but it was always shorter stories. It was always things, I think we all probably picked up a lot, and we could probably all give a big word of thanks to LeVar Burton, because I remember reading Rainbow as a child, and I remember picking up these books and reading them and being very interested. But I didn't really get a love for a certain type of literature until I got into probably middle school, and then in high school I picked up some interest in poetry. In fact, quite a bit of interest in poetry, and then moved on to kind of bigger undertakings. I really didn't have the patience early on to read novels. The first novel that I ever read was part of my fourth grade class. We all had to read Shane. I don't know if that's something that we all saw through Texas, but we read this novel about a kind of a Western epic. It's a good book. The movie was good, but I remember being interested in stories, right? And where I'm from, there's a history of storytelling. In fact, it was an author that first kind of made me understand that coming from a small town, coming from a little Texas town, where there wasn't a big, where academics was not at the forefront of everybody's mind, we had a local author, and he was an everyday guy, right? His name was Bill Brett. He wrote a string of Western novels. One called The Stolen Steers, I pick up and I still read it every once in a while because it's just a great book. And by knowing him and him being in the community, I went to school with his grandson. My dad went to school with his son, right? It made me feel like, hey, maybe somebody from my little hometown, somebody from, these humble beginnings, right, can do something, can make a bigger mark on the world. And I attribute Bill Brett, and knowing that, hey, here's somebody who produced something that I can go to at that time, Walden Books, right, or to the bookstore, and I can pick up and hold a book that he read that somebody printed, right, and it's a story that's going to live on forever. And he was a great storyteller, and thinking about it now, it was probably a really big influence on my life, because it showed that you could do more, and you can take a story to the world. So that was interesting, and that was kind of early on in my life. I knew somebody who was an author, and I read their books. And then I had a series of teachers, starting in middle school and going all the way through high school, that really gave me a love for literature. Now, my mother read a lot. My uncle and aunt read a lot. My father didn't read as much, but he always told a good story. He's still a pretty good storyteller. So it's and I'm sure, my son's dyslexic, and he deals with issues with reading. I'm sure my father deals with the same issues. There's some things I struggle with here and there, but not to the extent that they do. So I have a strong appreciation and understanding that sitting down and putting the time in to read a lot is easier for some people than others. But when I got into high school, I learned about transcendentalists. I learned about Emerson. I learned about Thoreau. I learned about Wordsworth. Wordsworth is still one of my favorite poets. I still read Thoreau when I can. I just that whole world of being able to explore different ideas and different thoughts and write them down and people read them 100, 150, 200 years later was just amazing to me, right? It was like a way to be immortal. So I really enjoyed reading all of that, and it took me to a different world, right? So I'm here. I am in a small East Texas town, and I'm reading about very similar things that Wordsworth wrote about from the countryside and in England. And then I found Sherlock Holmes, and once I found Sherlock Holmes, it was done, right? So when I got into college, I moved into this time in my life where I really started reading Hemingway, Faulkner, that entire group of not Faulkner, but Hemingway and the group of expatriates that were in Paris in the 20s, and just all those stories were great, and I just consumed those like crazy. It was a whole different world. And we'll do a little something about Parisian coffee shops because it is one of those cool intersections. But I became a really big fan of books that had very good dialogue, and honestly, that's where Hemingway is praised for a lot of things, but really what I feel like he does the absolute best at is dialogue. Everything that, whether it's an internal dialogue or whether it's a dialogue between characters or among characters, there's really nobody that I've ever read that wrote dialogue like Hemingway. Don't read his poetry. But I found Sherlock Holmes, and I read a lot of Sherlock. I read the canon first, right? I just swallowed the canon like it was a cake. And then I moved into some of the pastiche, and a lot of that I really liked. Some of it not so much, but a lot of it I did. And then I put mysteries and things on the shelf for a while, and I got into reading Anne Rice and a little bit of like edgy horror type things like that. I always loved Poe. But I went on this little Anne Rice kick for a while and really enjoyed that. That was fun. And then I kind of got back into mystery when I got out of college, and I started reading Jeffrey Deaver and James Patterson. Looking back on that, I remember those stories. I remember the books, and I have fond memories of those. When I go back and try to read them, they're not as enjoyable. It's kind of like going back and watching the Dukes of Hazzard. Now, I remember when I was a kid, I went back and watched Dukes of Hazzard, thought it was amazing. Now I sit down and try to watch it, and I'm like, oh my God, what were we watching, right? So, but yeah, I really enjoyed, and really those first few books, first few Alex Cross books, I still look back at those and think, man, they were good stories. And then by the time you got to the fifth or sixth, the plot lines were the same. Things got to be very, very cliche. There was the writing just seemed to change, and I don't know if the writing actually changed or if it just became a little repetitive to me. But from that point, I moved on and started reading some different series from lesser known authors. But probably in the last 10 years, I've been really making an effort. And I don't know if I've been really making an effort to try to read 40 novels a year. And I've been on, if I count the books I listen to on Audible and the books I physically read, I've been making it. But I feel like whenever I'm reading, I'm a better writer, I'm a better communicator. So the more I read, actually, the more productive I find myself being, and the better quality my products tend to be. So so that's one reason why I continue reading. But I found a number of great series. I think the first that I found that I really liked was the Laurie King books with Mary Russell. I think it started with The Beekeeper's Apprentice. Excellent group of books. I got about halfway through them and I moved on to some other things. I go back and revisit periodically, but it's a good series that does involve Sherlock Holmes. And a number of other series that I've been reading over the last few years have been the Ian Rutledge novels by Charles Todd. The Kareem Abdul-Jabbar has co-authored some excellent books on Mycroft Holmes. So there's a lot of really fun stuff out there right now. I still read a lot of series. You know, Anthony Horowitz, his work that he's done on Sherlock Holmes, the work that he's been doing with the novels that he's actually a part of, where he plays kind of a Watson character. I can't fathom how this guy puts out so much stuff, and it's all pretty good. So I read a lot of that stuff. And then as far as classics, I've been going back and picking up some classics, and those are always fun. You know, there's a reason why Picture of Dorian Gray or the Scarlet Letter, or you know, a lot of these classic novels, classic stories. There's a reason they stand up, right? And really, we see a lot of them in our current novels. We read, man, that's a plot line that I think I picked up from something that was written 100 years ago, right? So so that's fun to find those little threads. And that's really, you know, I read a lot of mystery novels. The other genre I read is biographies, and I really like a biography. Currently, I'm reading Walter Isaacson's biography of Benjamin Franklin. Actually, I'm listening to it on Audible right now. He also wrote a book called The Innovators, which was really, really amazing. You know, the good thing is he doesn't really pull many punches. You find out the good, the bad, and the ugly about people. I really like real stories, you know. So biographies are something that I've worked into my my rotation, right? I still read a lot of poetry. I subscribe to some poetry journals online. I write a little bit of poetry. I absolutely love reading the poetry of Wendell Berry and Dylan Thomas and William Wordsworth. Those are probably my three favorites. But T.S. Eliot, you know, just great poetry is something that you can consume relatively quickly, right? But then it plays around in your head for a long time, and I really respect the way that that poets have communicated very intense feelings in a way that we can really we can internalize them, right? Because many times it's just a few lines that we can kind of reverberate in our mind, and it means something to us. Where you know, a passage in a novel may not be as easy, but a line or two in a poem really kind of sticks with you. So I find poetry to be one of the most raw and what's another word for it? It's just very emotional to me. Poetry is very emotional, and that's why it's one of my favorite forms of literature. The other little bit I read, I like to read these leadership books. Simon Sinek, what's his name? Simon Sinek and Grant, whatever. But they're great books to read. I really enjoy interactions and reading about interactions. So so that's really been my my traipse through literature. I do like things that take me out to the countryside. I like things that are not crazy foreign to me. So sci-fi sometimes is a little bit too distant for me to get into. But oddly enough, I read a lot of things that are set in other countries because it's still distant enough to where it's new and exciting to me. It's not something I know, everything about, but it's real enough that I can really understand and grasp it, right? So I read, that may be why I like Victorian detective novels. It's set in London, right? Because it's a foreign world, but it's a foreign world that I can kind of understand. I like westerns, right? Because it's a little bit of a foreign world. It's set apart, but it's familiar enough to where I understand. I have kind of a touchstone for it, right? I can reach out and touch it in history. So that's where I am there. I hope you enjoy literature as much as I do, and quite honestly, literature fits so well with these other two. I find myself being when I have some spare time, I really like to go sit on the porch and grab the book I'm reading, or a or a group a collection of poetry, and smoke a pipe and drink some coffee. And it's really a personal kind of, almost like it's almost a spiritual thing, right? So we'll talk about what kind of pipes to smoke whenever you. There's certain pipes I have that are my reading pipes. Maybe I'm just weird, but there's some reasons for it, and we'll talk about that in the future. But I hope you kind of have a better understanding of where I am. I think we're going to talk about a lot of different types of literature. It'll be the stuff I enjoy. But you're going to get a lot of mystery. You're going to get a lot of European-based mystery. We'll talk about some westerns that are really fun. Certainly, we'll talk about some poetry and a little bit about how poetry in particular, but also some novels fit into some major cultural movements. So yeah, I like to read. I like certain things, and I hope you enjoy this channel as we move through some of that. And I welcome any comments or any kind of, whatever you find interesting. Let's talk about it. So with that, this is the last of the origin and evolution. I guess it is I guess it's a trilogy, right? Well, we're making trilogies now. So I hope you have a great week. Enjoy a cup of coffee, a pipe, read a little bit, and I'll see you with the next video.